Our reading this morning is from 1 Kings, chapter 19, verses 1 to 19, and interestingly, just the last sentence of verse 21. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a message to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. He came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the tree and fell asleep. All at once, an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he travelled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." The Lord said to him, "Go back the way you came, and go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram. Also, anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel, and anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat from Abel-Meholah, to succeed you as prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death any who escape the sword of Jehu. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, and all whose mouths have not kissed him." So Elijah went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was ploughing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became his attendant.
Well, good morning, everybody. Just to let you know, I'm taking a week's holiday leave next week, so I won't be here on Sunday, and for those in the cafe op shop, I won't be here on Friday week, but I'll be back on Sunday the 19th, fresh off the cruise which gets in at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'll be coming here after breakfast on board. So that's just to make you jealous. Anyone who's ever suffered a nervous breakdown or acute depression associated with severe stress will feel some affinity with this story this morning, because I think there is a psychological element to this story. So although Elijah is certainly a hero of faith and he's the preeminent Old Testament prophet, the Bible never seeks to gild his image or indeed the image of any of the people in the Scriptures. It presents the truth warts and all. It's very real. And by doing so, I think that is one of the ways the Bible offers us all hope and encouragement in our frailty. Now, you might know the story that precedes chapter 19, that's in chapter 18, where Israel has gone off the tracks in terms of its spirituality. It started to worship Baal, the idol which was common to other peoples in that general vicinity. And apart from immorality, there was corruption and arrogance amongst the leaders and rulers. Things went downhill very rapidly, and only a small number of people remained faithful to Yahweh, the God of Israel. And so Elijah's called upon by God to face down the prophets of Baal, and you might remember they go up to the top of Mount Horeb, and there's a sacrifice ready, and it's a case of a competition. Well, it's a bit more than a competition, it's a life and death competition as to which God is the true God. And so the test is which God will set fire to the sacrifice. And so you have this great throng of people up there watching, including hundreds of prophets for Baal, and we know that indeed Elisha's prophets were with him too, even though their number may have been smaller and they were very much in a minority in terms of the power structures. So they have this great showdown, and ultimately Elijah wins, and it even has a little bit of humour depending on which version of the Bible you have. There's one point where Elijah's watching the prophets of Baal, carry on, dance, scream, cut themselves, all sorts of things, and nothing's happening. And he says, well, where's Baal? Has he gone to the toilet? Actually, the wording in the Old Testament is actually a euphemism. So he seems to be really on top of things. Not only does he end up the one who asks God to send down the fire, and the fire comes down and burns up the offering, in which case suddenly the prophets of Baal run away, and then the other prophets that are on Elijah's side carry out a mass execution of those they can catch. So it seems like Elijah's won, he's on top of the world, he's full of confidence. And then we hear that the Queen and King Ahab decide that this is not really such a good thing. So the Queen says, as you heard in the reading, right, we're going to go after Elijah, we're going to get him. He's upset the apple cart, he's disturbed the status quo that gives her and her husband the power and authority and all the friends of ours who have a loose association with our church, my home church. They've had an annus horribilis. He was diagnosed with eye cancer at the beginning of the year and had to have treatment for that. Then his wife had major back surgery, and then she had a diagnosis of lung cancer, all within a 6-month period. And they were pretty much at the end of their tether, and they just rang and said, can you just come? We don't know what to do. We've got medical appointments to go to. There's other issues within their family. They've got children from young adults down to a teenage. And we were able to go. And all we really did was I took him out for a coffee. We sat and chatted, had a short prayer, even though they wouldn't consider themselves people of faith as such. And we had just amazing response the next day. They just sent us a beautiful card and a little gift. It really didn't take very much for us to do that, other than the fact that we changed our plans that morning, but nothing significant. That made a huge difference. And we can make a huge difference in people's lives sometimes when they're going through tough times. We don't have to be an expert psychologist. We don't have to have all the answers. We just have to have an open heart and listening ears. But it's interesting how Elijah responded to his stressed condition. Perhaps unconsciously he was seeking solitude. It's not always the best option, particularly if depression's the problem, but it is appropriate when you're under great stress and you're greatly fatigued. Sometimes we just need to have time alone with the All One. So verses 5 to 6, we pick up the story again. Elijah lay down under the broom tree and fell asleep. Suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, "Get up and eat." He looked there at his head. It was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. Notice that God doesn't berate Elijah or offer him advice. He just gives him what he needs at that moment: food, sleep, and the evidence that he cared. And again, that's not a bad example for us to follow in ministering to others who are struggling, just like Elijah was in that story. And God is showing Elijah his kindness and care in that simple provision of food and water, and not berating him, but just letting him be. Just flicking to Hosea 11, it's interesting about the way that we picture God in the Old Testament sometimes is, an ogre who's sort of out to get us and full of anger and so forth. But if you read carefully, you will see that that's not an accurate picture. And we pick up the story in Hosea 11 that indicates something of this same God that Elijah encounters here. So just reading from verses 3 to 4. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them up in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness, with bands of love. I was to them like those who lift infants to their cheeks. I bent down to them and fed them. Now, what's interesting about those verses, and I'll just add 8 and 9 because it just fills it out a bit more first. How can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? And Hosea's writing to a people who have rebelled against God. How can I make you like Admah? How can I treat you like Zeboim? My heart recoils within me. My compassion grows warm and tender. I will not execute my fierce anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim, for I am God and no mortal, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath. What makes this doubly significant in the context of the story of Elijah is the opening of chapter 11. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. The more I called them, the more they went from me. They kept sacrificing to the Baals and offering incense to idols. Hosea is referring to exactly the same situation that Elijah just confronted. That, to me, is amazing. You see, while this sermon is about Elijah, God's faithful but exhausted prophet, it's also God's care for what you might call the baddies. Hosea is writing to the baddies, the very ones that Elijah was confronting. So God's not a harsh taskmaster, but displays the best of fathering and mothering. And sometimes he knows better than we know ourselves what we need. We always risk trying to perform for God, to impress him with our dedication or how good we are at doing what we're told or fulfilling a particular calling. Sometimes it's out of guilt, sometimes it's out of pride. Sometimes it's out of ignorance of grace, and when it's from any of those motivations, it often leads to burnout. Now, we don't know whether that's true of Elijah, but certainly he was burning out. So let's pick up the story again back in 1 Kings 19. The angel of the Lord came a second time, touched Elijah and said, "Get up and eat, otherwise the journey will be too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. And then he went in strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. At that place he came to a cave and spent the night there. So notice it's only after Elijah is refreshed that God speaks to him and gives him a very simple thing to do, which is he's actually not giving him a new mission. He's just telling him it's time to move on, to go somewhere. And even when he gets there, there's no immediate requirement to do anything. God's not in a rush. So what happens next? Well, then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he answered, "I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." But God encourages Elijah here to name his problem. He listens in. "What's the problem, Elijah? Tell me what's really bugging you." And God listens first. He doesn't talk first, he listens. Because only then is Elijah ready to listen to God. And again, that's pretty good advice for any of us if we're seeking to help someone in need in a circumstance like Elijah's. Someone has said, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so listen twice as much as we talk. And then comes some of my favourite verses in the Bible. Verse 11. This is the angel of the Lord says, "Go out, Elijah, and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. Some versions will say, instead of the sound of sheer silence, which I think is the better translation, but they'll say the still small voice. That's still pretty good. That's the place of contemplation. Some of you enjoyed a bit of that last Saturday week at the retreat day. A place where you're aware of God's loving gaze upon you and your response in love gazing back. And I think that's what this was about for Elijah. More often than not, I think we meet God in the silence other than spectacular revelation. And it's interesting that Elijah had actually had that experience of God's revelation in the fire. That was the whole point of what he did on the mountain with the prophets of Baal. God came down as fire to burn up the sacrifice. But for some reason it didn't hold its place in his heart. What he needed was right here. It was just silence, or perhaps the still small voice. We are in a world where noise is part and parcel, and we often choose noise over silence. I enjoy a walk around my area, lots of trees and birds and so forth, and I really enjoy just watching and listening. But just about everybody out walking has buds in their ears. And I think, do you ever just be quiet and just listen to what's around without having to have something artificial plugged into your ears? That's part of our way of life. And sometimes it's good just to step aside, to find where God is in silence. I have a friend who talks an awful lot, and he can be overwhelming sometimes because he doesn't know when to stop. I think he has 2 mouths and 1 ear. And some time back I suggested, because of some issues he was struggling with, I said, why don't you take a retreat? And he'd never been on. Very sort of academic-oriented, very word-oriented, head-oriented. And he went away for the few days, and when he came back I said, how did it go? He said, oh, waste of time. He said, I can't sit around just staring into thin air all the time, and, you know, I've got to have something to read, I've got something to do. And I thought, how sad, because he hasn't changed, and the same issues that he had before are still there, because he hasn't got the patience to listen. Psalm 62 verse 1 says, "For God alone my soul waits in silence. From him comes my salvation." And I love the story of the Transfiguration in Matthew 17, 1 to 7. Remember, there's quite a tumult going on as the revelation of God appears before the disciples who are overwhelmed and overawed by it all. There's thunder and lightning, and suddenly the apparition of Moses and Elijah standing there with Jesus. And then at the end it says that all suddenly just sort of dissolves, and what's left is just Jesus standing in the silence with the disciples. I think that's how it is meant to be most of the time. And after the tumultuous events, notice how the story finishes for Elijah and for the disciples. In the case of Matthew 7, it talks about the calm. There's the calm. Similar to the storm at sea, where Jesus gets up and tells the wind and waves to be still, and there's just that calm. Then verses 13 to 14, when Elijah heard it, interesting, isn't it? How do you hear silence? But I think if you know something of the heart of contemplative prayer, you know what that means. When Elijah heard the silence, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him and said, "What are you doing, Elijah?" And he answered, "I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." He repeats what he's already said. Sometimes we need to get it off our chest more than once. So if you're a listener, be prepared to hear repetition. But listen. So when suffering severe strain, there's often no quick fix. So Elijah's still not quite there. He's on the way to recovery, but not quite. We need to be patient with people. The other thing, of course, is when people are under great stress, they often misperceive the reality around them. So notice here Elijah's lament, which he states twice. It's only half true. He's not the only prophet left. He's not the only one left. He feels like he is. That's true. But in fact, he's not. He's sort of missed out the fact that there were a whole pile of other prophets with him. There was the faithful remnant. He's not by himself. But severe stress can distort our perception of reality and exaggerate our problems. But like Elijah, we need a fresh perspective. And often that perspective comes in the silence, in the solitude, in listening. So verse 15, "Then the Lord said to him, 'Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive you shall anoint Hazael as king over Aram.'" God understands Elijah's conditions, and he knows that he needs this rest and recovery, and then he needs to do something. Because staying passive forever is also unhealthy. You can't just stay doing nothing. You need, though, the time where you can do nothing, where you can find that solitude. And finally, he gives the advice as to what Elijah is to do, and it's a relatively easy thing that he has to do at first. Just go, not back to where all the problems were, somewhere else, and you're just going to anoint somebody there. And that's true for us. Sometimes we're in that very hard place. We need that time of recovery. We need that time of solitude. And then when we're ready, we need to move out of that place, not get stuck in a rut. But maybe it's just going to be a gentle reintroduction to what it is that God has for us. So as you reflect on those verses and the fact that God provided this space and ministered to Elijah, it's amazing. There's God, or the angel of the Lord, representing God. He is the one ministering to Elijah. He's not saying, "Elijah, you've got to do this ministry for me." He is bringing the food. He's bringing the water to Elijah. So may it be that if you've been in a stressful place, something might speak to you about where you need to be to find that fresh perspective and to find that refreshment. And if you're not in that space but you're able to help someone who is, maybe some of the ways that God responds to Elijah might help you as you respond to the needs of the other. And may God grant us a blessing from his word this morning. Amen.